Hello again and very welcome to the chapter about the brave king. I would say this is one of the most entertaining ideas within defensive play. It's about situations where we have noticed that our king is not in a safe place. No matter we try to bring pieces to its defense, we can't stay there with the king. We have to find some other space on the board, some other place where it will be safer. And this idea can be carried out in two ways. We can either move the king in a vertical way, like upwards on the board, which is evidently very dangerous because there will be enemy pieces attacking it there. And the other idea is to move it in a horizontal way. Like, for example, you have the king. On the king's side, you notice that they are attacking you, and you move it over to the center and even to the queen side. So these are two different ideas. They are rather different in the way that vertical king maneuvers are much more risky, while the horizontal king maneuvers, they even have like a prophylactic touch to it. When you notice that perhaps your opponent will attack you, you try to move the king to the left or to the right, if the position is closed, for example, so that there are not open files where they can attack the king when it's running away, so to speak. Let's have a look. Let's start with one first example. I should perhaps warn you that this is a very tactical topic. A lot of calculation is involved. One slip and we can be completely lost. So if you would like to embark on a king maneuver using this brave king thinking, you really need to do some good calculation, a lot of calculation involved. I know this by myself, personal experience. I have used the idea and I have also had it used against me. It's a very powerful idea, and it's so surprising because we're not supposed to expose our king, but on occasions this can be very practical and it can be the only chance also to save our king. So let's get started. In our first example, we have with the white pieces Oparin, and playing black is Bortnyk. You can see that black's position is not very pleasant. White has managed to invade along the 8th rank. We can see that they are ready to give check on h8. If it was white's turn here, it's interesting to try to establish what would be the main threat. And I think what white was about to do here is they would like to give check on h8. Black will play king g6. At this point, white will give check again, this time with the rook. They would play rook d6. As you can see at this point, black's king would be having two defensive tasks at the same time. It's defending the king and it's defending the rook, which makes it difficult for them to defend on this occasion. So I think this is the main threat here. I was just thinking if I was missing some detail here. No, I don't think so. This is what this is about. This is the problem for black. And we can't prevent queen h8, and we don't have more pieces to bring to the defense. So the safe conclusion here is that the king cannot stay. It will have to run away in some way. And as you can see, it's not easy for it to travel along the 7th rank because white's pieces are there. So what Bortnyk noticed was that it will have to move upwards on the board. But we cannot start right now, I think. If we start now, I think white had some annoying check here. Yeah, they can play queen e8 first, so that if the king goes back, yeah, we're dropping the queen. And if we use the rook to interpose, white will play here, I think, rook d7. This must be killing, no? Rook d7, and I think this rook falls off one way or another. There is something with queen g8, and there is something with queen e6 if black tries to defend that rook. So difficult situation for black. They would have to play king h8 instead, king h6 instead. And here I think we can just use the idea that we talked about. We can play queen h8, and if they play here king g6, we would play rook d6. So that's the situation that we were considering. Very dangerous terrain for black, obviously, having the king so exposed as the king on h7. So what Bortnyk did here first, he secured his heavy pieces. He played the move queen g5. You can actually also play queen g4. It would be the same idea. So now they are protected, and at the same time, of course, we can also see that black is about to carry out mate themselves. So white needs to be careful here. Let's see what happened in the game. They played queen h8, and after king g6, white played rook d6 check. So this is very natural. That's what we usually do when our opponent's king is exposed. We attack it and we check it and so on. But with the hindsight, what they should have done here was to play queen f8, so that the king can actually not escape. But that was not easy to see, and I imagine that this was move 55, 56. They were probably in time travel. This would have been the best move so that the king cannot continue its journey. And black would probably have to go back, because repeating moves, making a draw, it's a good result in this critical situation. But now let's have a look at what happened. Rook d6. Of course, you know the next move here, we won't stay around anymore, we will leave the place, we don't want to go back in that case. Rook d7 will be annoying, so we play here king f5. And basically the king is trying to reach the e4 square, where it can't be checked easily by white. And I think there was no way back for white here, right? I think they're already lost, unfortunately, in this position. They have 2 checks here, but none is really working out well. If you give check on c8, black will play king e4. As you can see, we're helped by the fact that they have a pawn on c5. It's blocking their own queen in this case. They don't have any other checks. We're happy that the rook is protecting the pawn and so on. In the game, I think they gave check on f8, and here black simply played king e4, the plan that they had from the very beginning. So by now, I think the checks are over. There is only 1 check left, but it's not very useful for white. And at the same time, they are, of course, troubled by the mating threat. So they played in the game f3, and after king e3, you can see that black's little king maneuver, it has come to a happy end. They have managed to bring the king in this way, something like that. Did it go here? Here, I think. Yeah, this is the way it worked. And unfortunately for white, they cannot check the king in a good way. Yeah, I think in time travel, perhaps Oparin threw away a few more moves here. Rook d3, king takes, queen d6 check, king e3. And as you can see, no more checks, no more, not even a perpetual here. So white resigned. That was a fast, you could see, a fast finish of the game. You wouldn't expect that. You would expect that if somebody loses here in some 5-6 moves, it's black. But actually they found a very clever idea here to bring the king towards safety, which sounds absurd because you're sending it to the center. But in this exact case, it actually works. So queen g5, that's what Bortnyk played here. And after queen h8, he played here the move king g6, sending the king towards the center, where paradoxically enough, the king would actually be safer here in this complex example. Yeah, I was going to say also that even if you play queen e8 here, I think I looked at this later, it's funny, you won't believe this perhaps, but even here actually black is winning. We can't check the king in a good way, as you can see. Queen f8, again, there is king e4. White is very unlucky somehow with the arrangement of their pieces, that they can't use this square, for example. So even this would be lost for white due to black's strong attack also. So they badly need to play this move, queen f8. Yeah, that's definitely not an easy choice in the game. That's very tough choice to make in time travel, but they had to play like that to prevent this plan, and black should go back with the king then. So nice thinking by Bortnyk in this game, protecting the heavy pieces and then getting ready to run with the king. All right, in our next example, it's something similar, but this time we're playing with the white pieces. In this game between Lavrov with white and Alberto David with the black pieces, David has just played knight f2, and you can see there is a little threat here. Of course, we're about to get mated. There is queen h3, queen h1 coming up. So, well, how to help the king? We can't really bring in any defenders. We can't trade off black's queen. Not many choices for white here. There is actually only one choice. You can find it by the process of elimination. We should not allow the queen to reach h3, so there is only one move here, of course. You got it, g4. So when David played knight f2, I'm convinced that his plan here is what happened in the game. He played queen b1. This looks extremely scary for white. You can see that there is a concrete threat of mate. Black would like to give check, then give check again. I think you can give check on both places, but let's say you give check on g1, and then the king goes up to f4. We have queen h2. Mate, right? Yeah, I think so. It's mate there on f2. The king could not, on h2, the king cannot go anywhere. So that's the threat that white is facing here, and we cannot really prevent, obstruct, in any way distract black's queen. So there is only one move here, and that's what he played in the game. Lavrov took on e5, method of elimination, you could say here, used by white. There's nothing else. But also, we could say that it's about the brave king, because now white is evidently relying on sending their king upwards on the board. So that happened in the game. Queen h1 check, king g3, queen g1 check, king f4. As you can see, the king found a path to liberty, queen h2, and evidently we have to play here king f5. So very nice little maneuver. The king started on g2 and it's now on f5. Of course, when doing all this, we had to make sure that g6 doesn't kill us. And indeed, I think there are at least two moves that you could use here. Well, there aren't actually many legal moves, but you could simply play king f6, of course. But I think even if you don't want to calculate, you could play something like rook takes g6, giving back material, right? Pawn takes king e6. This would also win the game for white. So actually the situation is not that difficult for them. After king f5, it was perhaps not that difficult to calculate, but still rather interesting that you can send the rook into enemy territory in this way and you don't get punished. So let's see what happened in the game. They played queen takes h4. Now, of course, big threat of queen g5 mate. I think also there is some other threat with g6 maybe, but queen g5 would be the main threat here. So white stopped that threat. They simply took the pawn on e3. So in this way we parry the threat and also we get an extra square for the king. So black tried here queen g3. Had they played g6, we should just make sure not to put our king on f4. That would be very bad for, I think, several reasons. One would be queen g5 and the other is actually queen h2 mate. So yeah, you will have to go with the king to e5 instead. I think this would be the safest choice. I guess that also you could take perhaps on g6, but why not just keep the extra rook? We're not scared here. There are not enough pieces for black to attack us. So in the game, after queen takes e3, black played queen g3, like last try in this position. What are they hoping for? I think they are perhaps hoping that they can get g6, king f6, knight takes g4 in, something like that, exploiting the pin. But white didn't give them a chance for that. White played here simple move, bishop c1, protecting, the queen in that way. And also white is preparing their own attack with rook takes. After all, they're rook up, so they're entitled to do that. I think at this point, black resigned. Yeah, if they play g6, we can just continue with king f6. That would be the simplest choice. So perhaps somewhat less dramatic than the previous example. This was not so difficult to see, but it's good to know of it, of course. We're not doomed because their queen invades after g4 queen b1. We're not doomed because we can actually send the king upwards. Here, simply take the rook and prepare this king maneuver along g3, f4, and ultimately f5. As simple as that. So very useful technique and absolutely essential in this case. There are absolutely no other way out. However, in our next example, we will see that there is actually a choice. In our next example, we are playing with the black pieces. It's a game between Eric Zhao with white and Akopian playing with the black pieces. So you can see that both kings are a bit unsafe, but mainly whites. What black would like to do here, they would like to bring the queen to g1. That is a nice mating picture you can see on g1. But okay, we can first take defensive measures. We could play something like bishop e7, and black would probably be better here, even if white gets the pawn on a7. This would be a slightly better endgame for black. We should not forget that they have the d pawn. However, what Akopian did, he started to calculate to see if he could actually win the game outright, because he saw that he had this plan of bringing the queen to g1 and mate white. So when he started doing that, if you and me, if we do it now, we think about queen e1, there will be two moves to check now. Either they take on d8, rook takes d8. After queen e1, they could take on d8, or they could also take on a7 to prevent our plan. So if we take them in order, no, after queen e1, the first one is easy to dismiss. If they play queen a7 to queen takes 7 to control the long diagonal, we can just block white's queen, right? Exactly. We can play d4 so that the queen cannot touch the square on f2. So after queen e8, definitely queen e1, sorry, the critical move would be rook takes d8, and then the fun starts, of course, because here we will not take back, because then they take and they have a perpetual, right, on the dark squares, as you can see. So if we do this again mentally, trying to put ourselves in the player's place, if we do queen e1 and they play rook takes d8, we will just stick to the plan, right? Queen f2. White will play rook takes f8, you can see. We would play king d7, their only move would be rook g8, and we would play king h6. and then the king is moving upwards, and we will see if it can actually save its king there. So yeah, it will be a lot of errors if we continue analyzing this. So let's have a look at what happened in the game. But I just want you to notice the kind of choice that black had here. They could have played a safe move, bishop e7, but Akopyan said, all right, let's see if I can actually calculate to win here, if I can finish off the game by precise calculation. So let's see how he did here. He played queen e1, so that the queen gives mate. White took on d8, as we discussed here. We should not take back, because then white has at least a perpetual. So simply queen f2. They took on g7. We play on f8, sorry, we play king g7, and here they continue with their attack. Rook g8, king h6. So far so good. We can see that white must give check, else they are mated. So all the moves here, they need to be with check, I think. So what would white play here? Well, we have two checks. In the game, they gave check on f8. The other move with rook takes. So how do you think black should take back if white takes on g6 like that? That's right. Our main priority here to avoid the checks. So yeah, don't take like that, of course. And if you take with the king, you give me more checks now with queen g8. So the right capture here would be with the f pawn. White would try to hunt the king with queen f8, king h5. Now they have to use this, what would you say, like desperate checks. They have to play g4 here to attract black's king to new checking possibilities. But after king takes, as you can see, if h3, the king will just go back and the checks are over, I think. So they would have to give up the bishop also to try to bring in the queen. But in this, under these circumstances, black could just take on h3, I think. Is that so? Yeah, I think so. Queen h6 and king g4. As I told you, I warned you, a lot of calculation involved here. Queen g5, and we play king f3. So their last chance here, by now you can see that black is also winning probably in the endgames if the mate wouldn't succeed. Knight d2, king e3, they will have to play f5. As you can see, discover the check, but we can simply play here king d3. That's a nice king maneuver, right? I think it started on g8, it went this way, it went like that, it continued, wow, like that maybe? Well, something like that. So in this case, as you can see, white's actually out of checks and they are lost here because black is still playing for an attack here. There are ideas like queen e1 and queen g1 with a skewer and so on. So yeah, interesting example, no? Interesting case. If white takes on g6, we take with f pawn and we escape the checks. So Zhao instead play queen f8. After king h5, again, he's out of checks, so he needs to give up that pawn. We saw the idea already, g4, king takes. And here again, we saw this h3, king h5, no checks anymore. So bishop h3 is basically forced. But here we have to make a good choice. And that's what I'm saying also, that this is something which requires a lot of calculation, because if we take, like last time I think, if we take on h3, they actually get away with a draw here, because they would give check on h6, and after king g4, they will play queen g5. At this point, if we play like in the other line, we will have to go back with the king here. Yeah, looks a little scary, right? But white will probably have to go for a draw with queen h6, because there is also the threat of queen takes f1 and queen f3. But if we go for the full point here, if we play after queen g5, king f3, like in the other line, you can see that now white has an extra rook. So white will play knight e2, king e3, f5, king d3, and I think white had some good move here, right? Yeah, exactly, queen g2. So they're actually giving back material here in order to save their skin, and they will have an extra exchange if black takes on g2 and on d2, and the check on e1 is not so convincing because they can block. So this would be a pitfall in the game. Akopyan noticed that he must go like that. One funny detail about this example is also that you would say, all right, all the attention is on this side of the board, right? Like that. But actually this little pawn, if it wasn't there, white would probably be winning by playing queen a3. So you have to really pay attention to small details when you're carrying out this idea. Knight e2, king e3, knight c4. Yeah, if queen c5 check, that he must have also calculated. d4, as you can see, after knight f1, king takes f4. No matter the material balance here, white is completely lost. They cannot give checks anymore in any way. So queen g1 is coming next turn. Yeah, incredible, no? So after king e3, they played knight c4. Last chance now, trying to bring in the queen like that. But Akopyan, he had everything under control, as you can see. Again, white's own pieces, they fight against them. After king d3, white is very sorry that they cannot give checks on any square on the board. Yeah, extremely unlucky. So here, I think white resigned. So he was correct in doing all this, Akopian. That's a great calculation exercise. Even if you know the solution, you could do it again. You could try to figure out how does black win in a forced way from this position, and you would find the variation that we just looked at. Interesting journey by the king. So basically, he had a choice. He could have played it safe with bishop e7, but he went into calculation mode and he noticed that, all right, I can actually make this work. Queen e1, and after rook d8, queen f2. Sorry, because after rook takes f8, we are ready to send the king like that, like over here and there and here and so on, and the king would eventually escape, and black would win the game thanks to their mating idea. I have a similar example, perhaps slightly simpler than this one, that I wanted to show you also, where we are playing with the white pieces. It's a game between Chigayev with white and Sarana with the black pieces. It's a chaotic position. You can see that white's take change down, but black's king is very exposed. White has some plans here like rook d6 and bishop d5, but as you can see, the bishop right now is being attacked, and also you can see that black has some counter resources like rook check, and don't forget that there are some tricks like rook takes h2 and queen f2 check. That's something to take into account. So not completely clear what's going on here. There are different moves that white could consider. For example, if you play the normal looking move bishop c2, you're actually in trouble here. Black could use the intermediate check rook h7, forcing white's king to g2, and they're actually not interested in this. They have something else going on here with the rook. Aha, you got it. Nice. Rook e7 coming to take the pawn on e2. So this would not be advisable for black. What Chigayev did, and I remember this situation because in one of my losses, when I faced this idea, my opponent Ulibin, he did exactly the same thing. What Chigayev did, he checked the most forcing move. He looked carefully, calculated well, and he noticed that the king can actually get away. How does that work? Well, he played here rook takes a5. That's, of course, one of the first candidate moves because we are winning a tempo and we are getting ready to play bishop d5, and also black has some issues with defense and so on. And so the problem with this move is that you really have to calculate well, because black will play here rook h7 check, and after king g2 they will carry out that trick. They don't have so much else to do here because bishop d5 is killing. So rook takes h2, we have to take queen f2. As you can see, we have a draw in the pocket. We could play king h1. Yeah, they can't use the rook because we still have the bishop on the board. So king h1 would be a draw here after queen f1, but what Chigayev had noticed was that he can actually get away here with the king. Brave king, you could say, unlike the previous example, there are not so many black pieces capable of attacking white's king. So he played king h3 here, brave and correct. Queen f1 check, king h4, queen h1 check, king d5, queen h5 check. Here we have to be a little careful, of course. We cannot go this way because we're getting mated, as I told you. One slip and it's bye-bye when you're using this idea. So king f6, that's of course the right choice, because now the king actually has more squares available. After the move queen h8, this is of course something that had to be checked on beforehand, but you can see that white is fine here. Fortunately, the rook is defending the queen, so we don't have to play king e6 running into the skewer. We will play king e7 instead, and black has difficulties giving check at this point. I was going to say, but I'm checking my notes now, and I actually have king takes d6. All right, so maybe that's better than king takes d6. Interesting. Aha, how does that work? If rook b6 check. Oh, so we can then just take the pawn. Interesting. All right, that seems fair enough. Perfectly possible. And after queen h5, we can just bounce back and we would be comparatively safe. Yeah, exactly. If queen h6, we have queen g5 check. Yeah, that's a nice counter check. So yeah, white has so many pieces, also material advantage, that they should be winning here. So king f6, in the game they played rook f8, and now white had to play king e7, avoiding rook e8. Black continued to give checks here. I mean, this looks a little nervous for white, but interesting, they can save their skin. I think one explanation is that actually our pieces are fairly active now. We control a lot of squares. That's useful when you send your king into this kind of dangers. So if queen h7 check, king d6 would be our almost only move, exactly. And if they now take on e4, we would look for the trade of queens somehow, I think. No, is that so? No, not really. We'll look for the trade of rooks. Queen d5 check, and then we play rook a8. Very practical because they don't have a single check. And yeah, our king is in no danger. So after king e7, they played instead in the game queen g5. We continue the king walk towards the queen side this time. King d7, queen d8, almost getting mated, but no problems on the sky here. King c6, you can see if rook f6, we can go backwards with the king like that. You see how close they are to mating us, but yeah, we can take here if they give check on b6, for example, and if they take on e4, we could simply take back. And we are getting ready to trade queens like that. Interesting now, you can see how we traveled with the king in this example also. The king was, I think it started on h2, and then it has traveled like something like this, and it walked that way. Did it go this way also maybe? Something like that. Yeah, long journey for the king. In the game after king c6, they played queen c8. White played king b5, and after f takes e4, queen d7 check, and we met with bishop c6, by the way. Again, we're happy, of course, about bringing more pieces closer to the king. F takes e4 was played in the game, and by now white has different ways to proceed, but what they played was very, very practical. They start with queen d5, so that if black moves the king to h8, there will be a possibility to trade queens with queen d4 if the king goes back. We're very happy, of course, to trade queens. And if black's king goes up, we can actually introduce our rook into the battle. We can start attacking, and that's what happened in the game. After king h7, of course, white hurried to start their own attack. Curiously enough, it's the black king which is suffering in the very end. Their king was much more exposed, interestingly. Rook a7 check, king h6, and of course, we just go for... We look for the checks and we try to mate them before they get a second chance to attack our king. So queen d2, of course, as you can see, if they play g5, we can come back, and we have the mating idea with rook h7 if the king goes up. e3 was played in the game, it doesn't make a big difference. Queen takes g5 and queen b6 check. Aha, we're happy to have that check, so that if king h5, we can go g4. I think we're mating there, right? King there, and probably before they can get the brave king, we should go back with the queen, no? And in the end, as you can see, we mate them with rook h7. So nice display by Chigaev. He calculated very well, and he bravely opted for rook takes a5. Okay, he had a draw in the pocket, but he wanted to win this game. Rook h7, king d2, rook takes, king takes, queen f2, and here he started his brave king maneuver by means of king h3, then king h4, king g5, king f6, king... Yeah, where was it? I lost track of this already. King e7, and the king walked, something like that. So very nice concept. You won't obviously get a chance to do this in every game, but it's good to have it in the pocket to consider it on occasions. It can actually be a very good option. All right, let's have a look at one example from the opening phase. This can happen in some openings. I remember, for example, there was this famous game, Mikhail Tal with white and Larsen with black, if you perhaps saw that game. Larsen bravely played knight e7 in the Alekhine's defense, and he invited Mikhail Tal to play knight takes f7, king takes, and queen h5. Maybe you have seen that game. In that game, you can actually see how... I mean, Tal played something else, but the variation is well known. In the Alekhine's defense, the king starts walking. Queen h5, king e6, and the king walks to d6, and it goes to c7. And I don't know, today I think it's supposed to be winning for white, but in any case, it's a good example of a brave king in the opening. And here I would like to show you another one, which is perhaps even more entertaining, this example. It's a game with white pieces, Daisy Cori, playing black is Larinho Nieto, and at this point you can see that white just played bishop d5. That's strange, no? The bishop is in the air. But you can see Cori's idea is that if black takes on g5, well, she will take on c7, and she will pick up the rook on a8. It's clear that also black is not lost in that case. They have nice positional compensation. They have a very strong knight on d4, but first Larinho checked other options here. Which other move would be possible? You could move the queen, you could interpose the bishop, you could interpose the pawn. I think, yeah, I'm a little lazy player. I would probably play bishop e7 here and just get developed, but I guess he didn't want to give up the bishop pair, and he went all in. He played instead f6. But this is something that Cori, of course, had prepared the reply to this move. So what do you think white played here? What was white's interesting idea here? That's right. Whenever you play f6 and you have the king on e8, be a little careful, please, on this diagonal. So what she played was, since queen h5 can be met by g6, she played first bishop takes. With hindsight, it was better perhaps to play something else, but okay, that's a different story. This is, in practical terms, evidently the most critical move. So let's see what happened here. G takes f6, and now queen h5, as you can see, we are definitely forced to go for a brave king here. That is no other choice. So king d7, we can figure out the next move here, queen f7 check. So what do you think? What to do with that king? Should we interpose? Should we move it somewhere? Yeah, this is a good example of intuition perhaps not being always reliable, or, well, would you say intuition or pattern recognition or whatever? I think most of us would check different options here. We would say the best thing would be to put something on e7, but then suddenly we discover that they have knight takes f6 and we get mated. So we say, all right, we have to move the king, and we would say, no, let's not go to c6 because then the king is getting exposed. It's better probably to play king d6 and play it safe. Well, actually, that's a wrong way of thinking. If you play king d6 here, white will have a nice way of bringing more pieces to the attack. What do you think white will play? They have to strike quickly now before black is able to stabilize this position by playing, I don't know, something like bishop e6. So what would you play? Aha, time is money. We will play c5. A little similar to what Zhao tried against Akopian when he did g4, right? And king takes, and he tried to attract the king to get more checks. c5, this would be the best choice here for white. After king takes, you can see rook c1. That's like when I was a kid and played, what's the name of this game? Bughouse. That's a typical idea. You would give away pawns and like that just to keep the checks going and hope that your partner would pass you a queen or something to continue the attack. In any case, this would be very dangerous for black. I don't think they can really save this position. If they go back with the king, yeah, what would happen in that case? I think we take on c7 now. I wonder how. Maybe with the knight. I think with the knight maybe. This would be dangerous. There would be threats like queen d5 or maybe knight e8 also. White has several pieces now in the attack, and they don't have to care about the threat of knight c2 anymore. So this is better to be avoided. So what do you think Larinho played in the game? Aha, he actually challenged intuition here. Or he challenged pattern recognition. He played here king c6. Beautiful. As you can see, we're not afraid of any ghosts here. On this occasion, they can give check whatever they like. They can use whichever discover check they want to, but we're not afraid. We have seen that we can actually conclude our king maneuver, brave king on h7. So you could say we walk a little upwards and then we walk a little downwards also. This is the only good move, and that's what he played in the game. You can see that, for example, if knight takes check, we would play king b6, and after knight takes a8, we can safely play king a7. Material would be at this point about equal, I was going to say, but no, not really. No, white would be. What is white up here? They're up, they exchange, and they have a few pawns. But if you look at the position as such, you can see that the knight is trapped, and also strategically speaking, black has a very nice grip on the dark squares. There is the threat of knight c2 also. So black would be doing perfectly fine here in this position, I think. In the game, instead of taking on c7, Cory played enticing move c5 to keeping more flexibility, as you could say, maybe some extra possibilities like. Yeah, what would be the extra possibility, by the way? What would be the difference by playing in this way? Maybe that the knight can like come back or something? Yeah, interesting. Or at least open up the c-file for the attack. But at this point, what Larinho played was simply knight c2. Because the rook is actually main enemy here, the rook. Before it gets to c1, it makes sense to trade it off. So knight c2, king d2, knight takes a1. Still, we're not afraid of any ghosts here. They can give check whatever they like. In the game, knight takes c7, and now as you can see, that was the point. Yeah, now I understand this. Cory played c5 to avoid king b6, exactly. But black simply took on c5. That's definitely brave king in this game. After knight takes a8, black could calmly play knight d4, finding king on c5, right? But also white's king is exposed. You can attack it from this side, you can attack it from that side, and black would actually be a piece up here, if I'm not mistaken. Aha, so this would be favorable for black. King takes c5, knight e2. White is trying to bring the rook to the battle. But at this point, black finally plays it safe. They play here king b6, so that if knight takes king a7, you can see that if each side takes a knight, black is in the end a piece up here in the game after king b6. Cory tried rook c1 instead to keep the game complex, but black simply played here knight d6. Yeah, you cannot give the check anymore, by the way. I forgot to say that. So they played knight d6 here, hopefully trying to get rid of white's queen. White's queen went to a2, not a good sign that the queen is retreating, but perhaps there was no other good square. They had to keep track of knight b3. Bishop h6 was played in the game f4, and here finally Larinho played bishop g4. Yeah, it's still a crazy position, but we can see that material-wise, now black is clearly ahead, and yeah, even if they drop the rook and the knight, they're still up material. And as for black's king, you can say that it's actually fairly safe on b6. So, interesting example. I did not know about this opening variation. I learned something from this example, and specifically, we had this lazy choice of bishop e7, but Larinho, he said that, all right, we will actually go all in here. He played f6, and after bishop takes, pawn takes, queen h5, he played here king d7. Very brave move, because after queen f7, king c6, he noticed that white couldn't make proper use of this discovered check. It's a good thing that our queen is on a dark square, by the way, to avoid getting captured by the knight. Okay, we will have a look now. We will turn the page and look at the more horizontal king maneuvers, which are somewhat less spectacular, but still very useful within practical play. So in our next example, we're playing with the black pieces. It's in this game Nitin with white and Puranik playing black. You can see that white is playing in an interesting way. They kept the king in the center. They're playing on the king side. They have the g file open. It's not difficult to guess their next move. Of course, they want to play queen h5, threatening mate, and if black takes, they could perhaps take with the pawn also, opening up the h file for the attack. So time for black to see how to face this plan, how to react with black. One option, of course, would be to take. I think white would take in this way to keep the dark square control. If g6 at this point, trying to play maybe king g7 and rook h8, what white could play here is simply they could switch plans a little. They could play something like queen d2, castle long, and play f4. And I think that strategically speaking, this is actually rather nice for white. I have seen some such games where this bishop is actually, it doesn't look bad, but it's not such a prominent piece in the structure. A knight would have been much smarter in this closed structure. White has a knight, so they can later on like reroute the knight and take and play the knight to f4 and so on. So what Puranik did in the game, he went for a different approach. He played here the move rook e8. As simple as that. Now after queen h5, he's ready to play king f8. The king is running towards safety. It could eventually move over to the queen side, but since the center is closed, it could also stay in the middle on e7, for example. White, probably they should have perhaps castled here, or they could also have taken on e6 first, but in the game they went like all in. They played knight h7, trying to refute black's idea. King e7 now forced, and after knight takes f6, black of course takes back with the pawn to give the king some more protection. So as you can see here at this point, the king is extremely safe, surrounded by pawns, and it's actually white who is a bit troubled now by king safety. They could have solved this, of course, by castling, but the reason why Nitin didn't play that is because he didn't like rook h8 and he loses this pawn. Even so, I think this was a better choice. Queen e2, rook takes h4, d4, that's the move that I like in this kind of position, but probably black would play something like queen c7, keeping things closed. And yeah, objectively black is okay. I think in practice white has some chances here. Between humans now, but objectively no problem for black in this position. They can bring in the rook and so on. But in the game, white didn't want to lose that pawn. They played queen f3 instead, as we talked about on some occasions, and we will come to this in a later chapter about the risks of materialism. We will talk about the fact that sometimes in defensive play, we need to have a really open mind about material. If you don't believe me, just look at what happened next here. Rook h8, h5, and now black played smart move here, queen f8. It's easy to understand this move. They would like to play queen h6, especially if white castles. They will play queen h6 and win a pawn, right? So white's a little worried about this. A good option for them, maybe bring in the knight to g3, but okay, this also means that they will lose the right to castling now. So they will probably have to copy black here after this. Perhaps they will have to put the king on e2 later. This would be the best choice. But all right, black will play something like rook here, and there are some tactical complexities. Yeah, I don't know exactly what would happen. Interesting. Yeah, in any case, this is something that white should have played, because look what happened in the game. They played in the game d4, trying to open up the game, which in a way it's logical because black's king is there, but also white's king is there. So what white hoped for here probably was ed, knight e2, c5, and now they would castle long, and then they would try to open up the game by c3. I think this is more or less what white had in mind, or maybe bring the knight to f4 and so on. But black said, no, I don't need to complicate things. They played a much nicer move here, thinking about white's king safety. What do you think black played? Aha, that's exactly what they did. They stick to the plan, queen h6, not so much for attacking the pawn, but in order to restrict white's king. So white played d5 here, trying to open up the game. After c takes d5, e takes d5, if knight takes, yeah, we will of course just take to keep the king fairly safe. Bishop d7, you can see that it's still tricky to play this with white. They played a clever tactical move here, knight e4, so that queen takes h5 can be met by queen takes f6. However, black thinks a little in broader terms. They think away from just taking pawns, and they think a little more about general activity. Can you guess black's next move here? Speaking of general activity. That's completely right. We have one piece which is not participating right now. We can introduce it into the battle in a smart way. That's right, rook ag8. We are now fighting for the first rank, so to speak. White's king is suddenly in huge trouble. You can see that no way they can play like that, because we would have bishop b5 coming up next. So in the game they had to play this move. Sad concession from white, because the rook is now passive and black hurried to bring in more pieces. Rook g4, smart move. You can see we're trying to play rook f4 and the king stays in the center. Black was having a clear initiative here, and white couldn't save this game. So you could say credits to black's king, which found a very nice place on e7. That happened from the very beginning here, because Puranik played rook e8, getting ready to move the king towards the center, which was a much safer place for the king than g8, where it was exposed to mate on h7 and so on. In our next example, we will see some more, you could say, complexities for the defender. We have a Queen's Indian battle where Jakobsen with the white pieces sacrificed a whole piece in order to open up black's king side, and on the black side, Johansson has to find a way to save the king. You can see that rook g4 is coming up, and also queen d2 targeting the pawn on h6. So what do you think? How can we improve king safety here? Could we bring some piece to secure the king? Mobilization perhaps? Or some defensive exchange? No, not really, no. There is no such thing here. The king will have to escape by itself here. It will have to defend on its own. So the only chance here is what Johansson played. Exactly. It's time to move over. King g7 very quickly, trying to get to the other side before white gets a bit closer in the attack. Rook g4 check, king f6. You can see that immediately if you play something like queen d2. I think we could just defend the pawn, right? Interesting, queen d2, or would we take on h5, f5? Queen takes. Interesting. I will probably not risk playing like that. If they played queen d2 here, I think I would just play rook h8 and I would run towards safety. In the game, white played a more clever way here. They played f4. They tried to open up the game. That's the right approach before black gets a safe ride towards the queen side. Black here, of course, we don't want to take. Then it's getting dangerous with perhaps rook takes and queen c3 and rook e1, things like that. So black plays in a very practical way, king e7. After f takes e5, d takes e5, you can see that the king is getting closer and closer. White played here rook e1, and at this point black simply continued with the move king d8. Still, we shouldn't paint this as completely favorable for black. Of course, white is more active. We have a bunch of pieces which are not very useful right now. So evidently the fight is not over, of course. Here, white is very active. All their pieces are in active places. So black needs to be careful. White played at this point queen c3, a good move because it prepares rook takes e5. And at the same time, if black plays f6, white will have a strong move here. Of course, the 7th rank rook g7 would be very nasty for black. Rook f7, perhaps a move like bishop g6. Maybe there is some chance of like giving back material, but it would still be dangerous for black. As I was saying, their queenside pieces are not very active here. So what Johansson did was much smarter. He just played queen e7. So in this way, black gets ready to give check. That check can be very useful, and maybe on some occasion also we might just park the queen on d6, which will stabilize a little the position, keep track of the square on f6, for example. So small, little important move, queen e7. Rook takes e5. Black didn't give the check, interestingly. They played queen d6 instead, keeping the check for some later occasion. And I think at this point what black would like to do here, since the king can't really cross the c-file, they would like to ask the bishop for help, so that the bishop trades, and if white takes, we will take like that, and hopefully the king will end up on b7. That's our plan here. And I think that's what actually happened in the game. Yeah, white played his rook f4, and black was able to carry out their idea. So it's always good to keep the computer in the background to get some extra advice, information, and the computer signals a very interesting move here, which I think is difficult for most of us humans to find. It says that we should play a3 here, so that seems like strange. Why spend a tempo on a pawn move like that when we're attacking? But the thing is that we should actually pay attention to black's plans here. So by playing a3, we would get ready to play b4. If we can do that, the knight will be a little marginated from the battle. And if obviously they go knight c5, our plan would be to play b4, I think. This would be our key idea here, and knight would struggle to find a good square. So this was an interesting move for white, but not easy to see. In the game, instead, they played rook f4, and now black is ready to play bishop c8. We talked about the idea. We want to bring over the king. If we look at the same idea now, if you play here bishop takes, king takes a3 to... Oh, sorry, I think I missed my way here. Bishop takes, king takes. Yeah, you can still, if a3, I think you can just play knight c5 and you bring the knight this way. But if you start with white, if you start with a3, knight c5, I just want to show you the difference of one tempo. After b4, what do you think black would play? Aha, we can now take on f5, intermediate move, since if b takes, we're giving check with queen takes. Else this would fail, we will have to put the knight on d7, which will be very passive. Now white will have chances later to play c5. So this is the tempo that white could perhaps save in the other variation. Had they played instead this move a3, black wouldn't have this chance, right? Knight c5, we go b4, and there is no intermediate move on this occasion. But okay, not easy to see this, and always, whenever you check some game, you will always see that the computer will signal some unexpected move that the humans will struggle to see. So anyway, something about, you could say, maybe restriction in the attack when you're attacking, but at the same time you're trying to keep track of what the defender would like to do. In the game, white failed to do so. They played rook f4, and after bishop c8, here they played bishop c2, but now it's easy to see black's next move, of course, bishop d7, so that the king can continue. And after a3, and you see, actually in the end they play this move. Another merit of this move is that if rook f6, black has queen b4, so maybe that's another reason why a3 is useful to rule out that idea. In any case, after a3, king c8, b4, king b7, black's problems are not completely over, but they're much safer than at the beginning. You can see that rook e8 is probably coming next. Maybe we can try to somehow reroute the knight at some stage. And the king is fairly safe. We're of course fortunate that they cannot really break through. With c5, we just take back, and yeah, nothing's happening really. We're even checking them. So nice display by Johansson. He understood that the king was in huge danger. There was no chance of keeping the king there. Some feeble attempt like, I don't know, king g7 maybe, something like that. No, that's what he played, right? No, if he tried to stay, I was looking at some move also, like king h8. Yeah, this would be very dangerous. No, queen d2 and rook g4 check. This is a different story. Sorry, this would be avoided with the black pieces. So it's better to move quickly before white's queen is able to get closer. It's important to move quickly. King g7, sending the king towards relative safety, you could say. In our next example, we have, I think, a similar situation, but this time it's featuring a king in the center. So in this case, white hasn't yet castled, and they won't castle either, because since they played g4 very early in this game between Savchenko with white and Nelas with black, since they played g4 very early, yeah, safe to say castling is out of the question, and unfortunately long castling is not available anymore. So white will have to be careful in this position. The g4 push was interesting and so on, and it's a modern way of treating these corner spot structures, but don't forget about king safety. Black has played very reasonable moves here. You can see that basically what black is trying to do here, they're waiting for white to take, they will take back, and then they will try to attack white. How could they attack white? Well, there are not so many pawn moves available, but they could at least try to double up, and maybe at some point bring the knights closer to the action, knight g6 perhaps. So white's king is in danger, and also there might be some idea with sorry, with the move f4 also coming up. So not easy at all. Let's have a look at what happened in the game. Savchenko took on f5, and after bishop takes f5, already now white is thinking about how to secure the king, and they played in the game. They tried to run with the king, but if they run now, I think black could even consider something like knight e6 and knight takes d4. Even this would be interesting. You could say that this bishop cuts like a knife, and the pawn on f2 is always a problem. If you play something like bishop d3, they'll take, and maybe this pawn will fall off and so on. So for that reason, after bishop takes f5, Savchenko played rook h2, securing the pawn in advance, prophylactic thinking. However, black continued with their attack. They played rook e7, very simple move, so that after king d2, I think that's what he played in the game. Is that so? No, knight a4 was played in the game. Okay. If he plays king d2, I think again maybe we have this idea with knight e6. Yeah, that's highly possible, no? So white played knight a4, perhaps trying to bring the king to c3. Is that so? Rook a8, and at this point I think definitely there are ideas with knight e6 and knight takes d4 or knight f4. So white tried here bishop h5, some kind of provocation measure to provoke black into playing g6, but black just played bishop g6 instead, and at this point white tried to run away with the king. But this didn't work out well because black found a very nice move here, attacking move. Very nice idea by Nelas, rook e4, beautiful, threatening to take and basically mate white, no, in the center. So it's not easy for white to escape with the king. They tried king c3, and what do you think black played next here? Before white's king reaches safety, what do you think black can do? That's exactly what they did also. They took on e3, you got it. Rook takes e3, pawn takes, rook takes, the king will have to go here. We're looking at a brave king here, but not every brave king will lead to success, as you can see. After the simple move bishop takes h5, if white takes back, now the queen takes is terminal, so white had to give up the exchange here, queen d2, and black simply went for the attack, queen e7 and knight c5. I think they played b6, no? Yeah, knight c5 and they played b6, and material-wise, black is quite okay here, and white king is getting killed, so this is not good for white. So black soon won this game, so anyway, his idea was probably correct to bring the king to the queen side. However, there is tension on the f-file. Black's pieces, they quickly get into play. So what we could do here, if you are familiar with the Benko gambit, if you're thinking Benko patterns like playing b5, giving away the b pawn, like you know it's opening d4, knight f6, c4, c5, d5, b5, c takes b5, a6, that's the Benko gambit. Black sacks a pawn on the b file to open up the queen side and attack on that side of the board. Actually, white could consider this kind of thinking here. So they could start with the move g5. This is what I call defensive sacrifices, when you give up something and you actually don't get it back. We will have a look at this in the next chapter, by the way, defensive sacrifices. So white gives away pawn. The point of this move is that we're not letting his bishop go to f5, and also it takes blacks a little longer time to open up the f-file. So g5, h takes, pawn takes. I'm not saying that we will have a strong attack on the h-file. They can probably always move away the king, but it's about something else here. It's about avoiding black's attack. So after queen takes d5, now we could use our intended move here, king d2. But I have a question for you. Let's say we do all this and black plays f4. How is white supposed to solve the problems with king safety? It looks very unpleasant to take on f4, right? Black will take back. If king c2, maybe bishop f5, and so on. Aha, so thinking in terms of the Benko gambit, very often in the Benko we like to trade queens in the Benko. Sometimes the queen goes to a6, it trades off a white queen on e2 and so on. And here white can do the same thing with reversed colors. You got it, queen g1, that's a pretty move. As you can see at this point, what we're trying to do, we're trying to trade off the queens, black's most active piece. If they don't want to trade, well, in that case, we can perhaps start thinking about an attack, bishop d3, and later on do something on the king side. No, we have the h-file open, and we could maybe play rook e1 and artificial castling, so to speak. So if they take instead queen takes d1, rook c takes d1, it's true that white has lost a pawn. Let's play a few more moves. I guess black will take on e3, we take back. We would like to play maybe bishop d3, so they will probably contest the diagonal before white, bishop f5. So I think even here, I think the computer was giving black a slight advantage, but I'm convinced that white can fight in this position. One idea would be to play b4, the minority attack, if a6 in play a4, and we continue in this business of creating weaknesses on the queen side. And at the same time, I think we have an active position here. We have a target on g5. It won't be easy for black to use this passed pawn and so on. So definitely, if you compare this with the game, I think this was the best choice. We did some kind of king maneuver. It wasn't a very long brave king. It just stayed on d2. It didn't need to run that way. Maybe, if, like I was saying, if black had played queen e7, they would keep the queens. In that case, perhaps after bishop d3, taking the b1 h7 diagonal, maybe then we would actually conclude this maneuver, or we would keep the king on d2. That's also possible. But it was important to think in this direction. He actually used the same idea in the game, but he didn't include the pawn sacrifice, which meant that black got a very strong attack. But if you use this little idea of g5, you give up a pawn, but after pawn takes, queen takes, we can actually now play king d2. So this is the key move, you could say, in this game. King d2, we prepare to go queen g1, and we are like vaccinated against black's attack, and we can even consider an attack ourselves. So that's what this interesting example was about. Let's have a look at one last example. It features a typical king maneuver, brave king maneuver in the opening. You would perhaps say that this is not such a brave king, but anyway, I think it's part of the concept of using our king in this way. This is about the prophylactic thinking that I was mentioning at the beginning. It's not like black's king right now in this game between Bauer with white and Alberto David with the black pieces. It's not like black's king right now is so exposed, but it can get exposed because it's a French. You can see white has played e5. That always means some attacking potential. So if you play like in routine fashion castles, what do you think white would play? Which would be white's most promising way of playing for an attack? Aha, they have these strong bishops, no? They have these strong bishops lined up against black's king. The queen is in the bad place. So queen f4, natural and strong. The queen comes to g4, sacrifices on h6, or not even sacrifice. There is a knight maneuver with knight g3, h5. I think this would be very dangerous for black. You could, of course, try to play f6 at some point, but then you're also weakening yourself. Like, if you go f6, maybe I can put my queen on g3, and I still have this threat, and who knows, maybe I even get to play queen g6. So white, black, they don't want to enter this kind of scenario with the king exposed on the king side, where also white has more pieces. You can see all these pieces like spectators. They're not involved in the defense right now. So what black did in the game here, David, very cleverly, he used an idea that's seen in multiple openings. You can see it in the king scene, and also white is often, when black is pushing the pawns on the king side, the king runs away. It happens in closed openings, because in open positions it's difficult to bring about this plan. You can't really think of a king maneuver, brave king, when the d-file is open and so on, or usually not. But here it's entirely possible because it's such a closed position. So what David played, yeah, I'm talking too much. You saw this move a long time ago. Of course, king d7, that's what he played. So he's bringing the king towards this side, where it's much more difficult for white to attack, because black is the one who's having a better situation on the queen side, playing b3 and b takes e4. I mean, you can do it. Technically, it's possible, but still black is having a lot of control on the queen side, thanks to having all their pieces there. So they would perhaps take back with a knight, and the king could perhaps even park on a6 or something like that. So very clever move, king d7. It's good to know that it also happens in the Winawer variation. And those of you who play the Winawer, after white's next move here, queen f4, you will imagine what black plays. What do you think black did with the pawn on f7? Should we push it, or should we defend it with some piece? Yeah, probably we should not move it, because right now the king is still in the middle. White will take, and they will get some extra attacking possibilities. So what black played here is the move queen g8. So that's the move that I recognize from the Winawer. I think it was Yusupov who used this idea, or perhaps even Bronstein. The point is simply that the queen helps to protect his pawn. It takes care a little of the king side, and in the Winawer version, there is a pawn on c2 in the Winawer, where black has taken on c3, which means that the queen can actually go to h7. Yeah, that won't happen here, but it's still a pattern which is good to know from the Winawer. You can put the queen on that diagonal. It will be very powerful. So it won't work here, but the move itself, it's clever. Queen g8, funny way of using the queen, but it's actually the best way, because black really, they don't want to push these pawns before the king is in relative safety. So that's what happened in the game. White played knight g3, black continues with their plan. They could have played king c7, but I guess that what David wanted to avoid was knight h5, after which g5 or g6 could be met by knight f6. So he plays first g6 here, slightly weakening, but white can right now. They cannot put a piece on the f6 square. For that reason, they played h4. Now they get ready to play knight h2, g4, f6 perhaps. But after king c7, if they carry out this plan, knight h2, black would still be quite okay here. One way to continue here, bishop d7, so that we can bring in the other rook also. And after knight g4, queen g7, we're talking so much about black defending, but actually they're about to attack now. They would like to play g5 at the right moment. So if white takes this pawn, for example, we will play rook h7. We will bring in the other rook. You can see that now it's the white king, which is in some danger. And if white plays knight f6, I was going to say that we will play g5, but we could even play on the other side here. I'm seeing in my notes, we could play b4 instead. Yeah, these French structures are always tricky. Who will push the pawns and on which side of the board and so on. But here this seems interesting for black because, yeah, as you can see, the rooks are connected and white's rooks are not connected, and there are even ideas like maybe you can push the pawn and put a knight on a4, or you could take and, I don't know, something like a4 and knight a5, knight b3, things like that. So interesting position, not the kind of game that I play myself very often, but I'm starting to understand it. It has some big merits with black in this case. So king c7, knight f1 was played in the game, bishop d7. Black is slowly starting some kingside action on the g file. White played knight 1 h2, a lot of knight maneuvers in this game. Queen g7 was played. After knight g4, finally at this point, black said, all right, I'm ready for the attack. You would expect him to play king b7 first to visually remove the king from that diagonal, but sorry, I guess time is money and he wanted to speed up his attack. So he played g5 here. After pawn takes, you can see that after knight takes, black has a nice move here based on the pin. So what do you think black played here? Which pin am I talking about? Yeah, probably that pin, right? This pin is not so promising because white could play something like knight f6, and now they keep the knight safely defended. But there is another pin, vertical pin, exactly. We can play here the move rook h4. That's what he played in the game, David. So that he's tying up white's queen to the knight, and at the same time he's getting ready to bring the rook to one of these two squares. So black actually had an initiative here. The game was later drawn. I think it was white who somehow used the king, brave king, or so brave king later on in this game. But in any case, you can see that black's king is perfectly safe. It was never attacked. It was some kind of prophylactic king, brave king maneuver, you would say. Very useful, especially if you play the French defense, to know about these ideas. So if we check this again very briefly, we had this position. Black had to make a choice regarding the king. They didn't want to cancel short because in that case white's queen would come closer and white would have many pieces in the attack. On the other side, the queen side was much safer, so they played king d7, bringing the king to the other side. And after that, sorry, they would be ready to attack on the king side because the king is out of the way, and now they can use the king side as their battlefield, so to speak. So interesting concept here in this French battle. Let's do a quick recap of what we have seen in this chapter about the brave king. We started looking at this game between Oparin and Bortnyk. Bortnyk found a way to quickly move away the king before something bad would happen on the king side. That was not a safe place for the king. In the center, surprisingly enough, the king was very safe. We saw in the next example that white found a path into safety with the king. Absolutely only choice. There was nothing else they could do. There was not even a choice here. Yeah, this was only move. Surprisingly enough, the king was safe on f5. Nothing happened to it, thanks to the queen also in the middle, of course. We saw that Akopian indeed had a choice, but he embarked upon this interesting idea. He gave away even a few pieces in order to carry out mating idea, but he wouldn't have succeeded if he couldn't escape with the king in a vertical way. Carefully calculated, many pitfalls. We also saw, that's good to notice, that white's own pawns played against them on some occasions here. They could not use the a3 square with the queen, for example. We saw that Chigayev had a similar situation, but slightly more pleasant, you could say, perhaps, or less calculation was required, but still quite some calculation was required. He sent the king towards the black camp, and black didn't have so many pieces to attack it, so it was actually rather safe And that was always like a transition to a winning endgame around the corner, trading queens and so on. So nice idea, very opportune usage of this brave king idea. Then we had a look at this opening example where Larinho was very brave and sent the king to the queen side, not fearing any discovered checks, carefully calculated. Despite appearances, Black's king was actually rather safe in this scenario. But one slip, of course, we saw king d6, c5 would have been killing, so one slip can be enough to lose also, so we have to be very careful when calculating and also when executing this idea. We saw that Puranik used a simple yet effective king maneuver to the center. There his king was much safer than on the king side, and it was actually white who ended up with problems with the king in the end. We saw the game where Johansson had a more, you could say, severe situation, more dangerous. He really had to move the king quickly away from the king side towards the center, and eventually he was able to even park the king on b7, like some kind of king fianchetto, where it was very safe. So very strong move. Please notice that he gave up a pawn on the way. That's perfectly normal in this kind of situation. We can definitely not be too materialistic when we carry out the brave king idea. We saw this Carlsbad example, which was very tricky, you would say. It was perhaps a little more about defensive sacrifices. We give up a pawn to restrict the opponent's attack, but it was important to understand that eventually our king would actually leave the building. It would try to move towards the queen side, or perhaps just stay in the center, similar to what Puranik did in his game, where he kept the king on e7. And finally, we saw David using this typical king maneuver in the French King's India and some other openings. He didn't want to keep the king on the king side, but he saw that he might be outnumbered. It's a much safer place waiting for the king on the queen side. All right, thanks, and see you in the next chapter.